I am delighted to present my paper on tracking looted art with graphs. Today I'll be talking about Wikidata. How to track looted art with graphs. Well, what are we talking about when we're talking about looted art? In this case, we're talking about Nazi looted art, forced sales, duress sales, that occurred between 1933 and 1945. Dates are different depending on the country. Germany, it starts in 1933, Austria 38, Poland 39, France, Netherlands, Belgium, with the German occupations in 1940, Ukraine 41, and spreads to every country controlled by Hitler's Third Reich. Jewish property is expropriated often with a legal veneer, at least in the early years, and provenances, that is the ownership history of the artworks, are often falsified. So we're focusing on artwork created before 1945, acquired after 33 in Europe. But to find them, we have to look through a lot of other artwork. Why Wikidata? Wikidata is an enormous knowledge graph. It has the tremendous advantage of including all of the entities coming in from any and all of the Wikipedia languages. That's just its base. In addition, other information has been added, which results in a massive collection of people, organizations, events, places, catalogs, museums, artworks, basically everything we need. Many key properties that are necessary for Holocaust and art research have been added by different people at different times for different reasons. It handles time and geography. And it has references for statements stated in ref URL, which are very useful for tracking information, and an incredibly rich library of external identifiers. That's good for connections and for disambiguation. And it's a sustainable project, as sustainable as the Wikimedia Foundation is. That's a key issue, as Smithies pointed out in his study of 100 digital projects at the Digital Lab. The danger is that projects disappear, and this is one that needs, I think, to persist. And Wikidata also offers a collaborative, open community. And this community is constantly improving and enriching and solving problems and linking out to other knowledge graphs and other databases. The fact is that the challenge of Nazi looted art is simply too big for any one project team. And there are ongoing projects in Wikidata which are helpful. The Sum of All Paintings project, which has brought in hundreds of thousands of paintings. The Wiki Project Provenance, which links those paintings to owners. There's a rich library of sparkle queries that various people have contributed, which are wonderful and which can be adapted. And there are the links to other databases and other knowledge graphs through external identifiers and through the Wikidata identifier. So the approach that I've taken is to create almost nothing. No new ontologies, no new platform, simply reuse what exists, and to trust the community to enrich properties and to map to key ontologies like SciDoc CRM, and just benefit from the progress that's being made on all sides in this wiki community. How? So how can we use Wikidata to track looted art? A couple of examples of things we can do. We can start with a red flag name. We can focus on persecuted Jewish art collectors and work out from there. We could look at restitution cases and work backwards from there. We could start with an exhibition that occurred at a certain time and work forward to the future. There are a number of things we could do. I'm going to illustrate a couple of them. They give you an idea. So I'll focus on 1,000 art looting red flag names, their networks, and arts that pass through their hands. Well, what is a red flag name? What do I mean by that? In 1946, the Allies published a series of reports about Nazi art looting The red flag name refers to an indexed list in what was called the final report. It was organized by country and contained, for each of the 1,000 names, a few lines detailing the connections between the person involved in art looting and the other red flag names. So here are a few of the names that pop up frequently in provenances that were mentioned in that report in 1946. So one of the questions we can ask is, which artworks connect to the red flag names? And for that we can run a query which will show us the artworks, the red flag names, and the various connections to the red flag names. Another thing that we can do is we could start not from red flag names, but with the people who were persecuted by the Nazis, the collectors who died in concentration camps or who ended up as refugees. So in this instance, we'll look at people who were in professions that were related to art, who died in concentration camps. And that's what this query is going to show. So we can view it as a table, of course, but we can also view it as a graph. And we have information about all of these people and the artworks that they owned as well. So what would be the next step once we know which art collectors died in concentration camps? Would be to find out which artworks they and their families owned, where are those artworks today, and through whose hands those artworks passed. They're obviously interesting names when one sees them in a provenance, and names that deserve to be checked. So in those first two examples, red flag names and persecuted collectors, we're focusing on the link between the people and the artwork. But we can also start from documents like news articles or legal cases, or events like Aryanization or a seizure. So in the next example, what we're going to look at is a focus on restitution claims. You've probably seen the headlines in the press where a family 70, 80 years after the Holocaust is making a claim for painting which they have found in a museum or in an auction house. So in this example, what we're going to do is we're going to start with the claim, which is happening now, for example, in 2022, or a few years before, look at all of the people who are mentioned in that claim, and then see which artworks those people owned, those people and their networks. What we're looking for are patterns, and when we run the query, we'll see a number of connections, which can be interesting. So let's take a specific example to be concrete. So in this case, this is an El Greco that was looted by the Nazis in 1938 and returned to the family in 2015. So there are a number of events that this El Greco is associated with. The one that interests us in particular here is the claim for restitution. So in that claim for restitution, there's a bunch of information that we're going to see. And so we're going to look at all the people or businesses that were associated with the artwork. We're going to ask what other artworks they or their networks owned, and then continue in an iterative process to uncover the various links. So if we look at the ownership history, there's certain names that are associated with the artwork. What do we know? What can we see about these names? Well, Julius Priester, that's the man whose family claimed the artwork. He was a Jewish Austrian industrialist who had a collection of more than 80 old master paintings, so one can wonder what happened to them. And one of the significant events in his life was the confiscation of the artwork. So another name that appears in association with this claim is Frederick Mont, who is one of the art dealers through whom the looted painting passed. He is the owner of Gallery St. Lucas, and he's not only associated with this El Greco that was looted, but he was also associated with a Grunwald painting that was disclosed as a fake. So he's an interesting name when you see him or his gallery in an artwork. So the question we ask next is, what other paintings were owned by Frederick Mont or his company, St. Lucas? And a query will show us that. And we can look to see who else owned those same paintings that Frederick Mont owned. And there we start to see the beginnings, potentially, of a network. And because Wikidata is a very rich knowledge graph, we know Wikidata knows a lot of things about the names that appear. And one of the things that Wikidata knows is whether or not they were red flag names. So Fritz Nathan is a red flag name. Gallery Fisher is a red flag name. Bonacossi, Charpentier, Adolf Hitler, of course. So we began to see not just a mess of connections, but some useful information about the people and the connections. What else can we find? Well, what we're looking for are patterns and hidden connections. So in this mess of data, what we need are some kind of organizing principles to help us to find them. And our approach is to identify key properties that already exist in Wikidata. We didn't have any properties created. We just used what exists, and see how we can use them. So for example, there's a property investigated by, and we use that to see who our red flags names are. They're people who are investigated by the Art Looting Investigation Unit. And so on with all of the other properties. So simple query can find anyone who is an art looting red flag name. And we can keep using that information in all other kinds of queries. So theoretically, this is very interesting, but to be useful, the data needs to be complete. So how complete is it? To find out, we do a gap analysis on the specific kinds of information that interest us for tracking looted art. And we use Wikidata queries to get this information. So we see that there are 172 red flag names in Wikidata out of 1,000, which is more than you'll find in most other databases. We see the number of art collectors, dealers, and art historians who were also members of the Nazi Party. And the good news, though, is that we have more than 1,000 collections, more than 400,000 paintings, of which about 30,000 were created before 1945. We have a number of art collectors who Wikidata knows died in Nazi camps, and quite a few art collectors who fled as refugees, but it's much harder to do a single query that will gather them all together. We can also use this gap analysis to establish priorities for updating data. When we see gaps that are important, that's where we need to intervene to update data. To help us keep track of things, we created a library of queries. Anyone can view them, anyone can use them. Just click on the link and that will run the Wikidata query. You can see a few of them here. What kind of results do we see in this study? Well, the main results concern the patterns, connections, and networks that we can visualize that will help us to detect looted art. We can see the extended networks of red flag names and the artworks that pass through them. We can see the itineraries and fates of the families of persecuted art collectors, both during and after the Holocaust, up to the present day. We can see the intermediate networks, that is, those that are between the red flags and the current possessors. And I think most interestingly, we can extract information that's locked into news articles, scholarly texts, legal documents, and books thanks to Wikidata properties such as depict main topic and describe by source. And so we can create linked data from these textual items. It becomes possible to visualize changes of ownership on the timeline of Holocaust events, which gives us important context. There's also interesting results for institutions and researchers that like to connect with Wikidata via API or use OpenRefine or use linked data themselves. And that is, Wikidata has now contextual information that they might be lacking, which can enhance their own knowledge bases. And of course, we can connect to all kinds of other projects. The dashboard had a surprising result, and that was that the information in Wikidata did not necessarily match the information elsewhere. And one can use it to monitor related digital looted art projects for completeness and accuracy. It can also break through data silos because it's not one museum or two museums, but there's 1,000 collections in there. It also contains external identifiers like Lost Art ID and the Museum Artwork ID, which brought together in a single item can match information, which is not necessarily available elsewhere. There are, of course, challenges ahead. Though growing, the knowledge graph is still incomplete, particularly concerning Jewish art collectors and their collections. Art dealers are often intermediaries, not technically owners, which limits what we can do with the properties owned by an owner of in Wikidata. Art provenances have many versions, each with its own author, publisher, date, text, and series of statements. How to represent this? Likewise with false provenances, which are very common with looted art. How can we represent these along with their authors and publications? If we can represent it, we can track it. Not all looted artworks are notable enough for the Sum of All Paintings project, and not all looted artworks are paintings. Not all museums publish provenance information. As for queries, there are technical limits, timeouts, and limits to processing power. So there are things that we could theoretically do that are very exciting that we don't know how to do. The expertise of Sparkle mavens would be very appreciated. And lastly, Wikidata continues to grow and may one day be a victim of its own success and face capacity issues. In conclusion, I think we can say that as the realization has grown in Holocaust scholarship of the connection between dispossession and murder, so have the digital tools available to study it. This paper concludes that for studying Nazi-looted art, leveraging existing graph structures has deep advantages in terms of the richness, permanence, connectivity, evolution, and reuse of the data, and that Wikidata is well suited to this task. Thank you.